Good evening and welcome to the OAA's inaugural election information session. As registrar of the OAA, I am tasked with the supervision and direction of every election and with deciding all matters incidental thereto. This information session has been introduced as a means of helping nominated candidates gain a better understanding of the requirements of serving on council and offers helpful context to ground your understanding as to why those requirements exist. The importance of council's role in shaping the future of the architectural profession cannot be understated in Ontario. As you will hear in today's session, there are seismic shifts happening in the world of regulated professions. Furthermore, the profession of architecture is poised to address some of the most challenging issues of our times: the climate crisis, sustainability, and the need for greater accessibility and inclusivity within the built environment, just to name a few. I believe strongly that having more information and greater clarity as to the role and function of council at the outset will lead to a more impactful, meaningful decisions that will create a more ethical, vibrant, and dynamic profession. In today's session, you will be hearing from the OAA Executive Director, Christy Doyle, and the OAA's Deputy Registrar, Claire Hepburn. Each speaker offers a unique perspective on the important role of council and offers valuable information that will frame the legal, strategic, and practical aspects of what it means to serve as a member of council at the OAA. To begin today's event, I would like to take a few moments to recognize the traditional lands on which we individually and collectively find ourselves. We are coming together today from different geographical locations and are participating from our homes and offices, all located on various traditional Indigenous territories on this continent known as Turtle Island. Please, everyone, take a moment to reflect on and recognize the significance of these territories to Indigenous people and on our mutual obligations to respect and share these lands. I will now turn it over to Claire.
Thank you, Christy. Before delving into the specific duties and responsibilities of members of council, it's important to provide a bit of context and to articulate the source of where their authority originates. Architects are among a handful of professions that are granted both the privilege of self-regulation and self-governance, as well as the privilege to practice within a protected scope with a protected title. In exchange for these privileges, the OAA has entered into a social contract, if you will, with the Government of Ontario, which has delegated the authority to regulate the profession of architecture on the condition that all such activities are carried out with the interest and protection of the public at the forefront. The Architects Act, its regulations, and the bylaws instructs the OAA and its council on the specifics of how that is carried out. I'll be identifying this evening and summarizing some of the relevant sections of the regulations. First, eligibility. The regulations set out what the eligibility requirements are to be nominated and to be eligible to run for council. So there are 3 eligibility requirements. The first one being that you are a member of the OAA. The second one is that you have an address of record within the electoral district for which that member is nominated. And third, you need to be in good standing. Good standing is defined in the regulations as not being in default of any payment of any fees, not being the subject of any proceedings before the discipline committee, and finally, not being under suspension by the OAA. Second, there are situations where a member of council would be disqualified from sitting on council. And those criteria include first, being incapacitated, second, being found guilty of professional misconduct or incompetence by the OAA, third, missing 3 consecutive regular meetings of council without cause, fourth, ceasing to be eligible for the election. So those 3 criteria I noted above would render somebody disqualified. And finally, the catch-all, which is if a member of council fails to perform the duties of a member of the council that are prescribed by the bylaws. So that brings me to the specific duties of council, which are set out in our bylaw, and specifically Section 7 of the bylaw, which states that each member of the council shall comply with the provisions of the Act, the Architects Act, the regulations, and the bylaws, and shall exercise the powers and discharge the duties of their office honestly and in good faith, and shall exercise the same degree of care, diligence, and skill that a reasonable and prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances in furtherance of the objects of the association. And those objects I will be discussing a little bit further on in this webinar, in order that the public interest may be served and protected. So I will now go through all of those. There are actually about a dozen or so duties that each member of council is responsible for. The first being the requirement that you familiarize yourself with the Act, the regulations, the bylaws, and with any other such records and documents as may be necessary as background knowledge for the purpose of performing your duties. And Christy Doyle will be discussing a little bit more about what that might actually look like. The second point is that you must attend every meeting of council and take part in discussions and decisions taken at its meeting, unless unavoidably detained by illness, urgent prior commitment, or other emergency. The third duty is to serve on committees which the council may appoint under the provisions of the Act. Fourth, you must be present and participate in the annual or other general meetings of the members of the association. Fifth, you must provide liaison personally or as an alternate to at least one committee or task force, the meetings of which you must attend unless unavoidably detained by illness, urgent prior commitment, or other emergency. Sixth, you must provide guidance to such committees or task force and its chair whenever necessary, and if requested, prepare a written report for the next meeting of council as to the activities, concerns, and intentions of the committee or task force. 7, you must take an active role in the affairs of the societies and the electoral districts within which you have an address of record, including appearances at society meetings as a representative of the council. 8, you must perform such duties as may be requested by the council with respect to liaison with other organizations and to act as a representative on joint committees and task force and at other functions in the electoral district within which you have an address of record. 9th, you must disclose any interest that you may have other than as a member of the council in any matter coming before the council, a committee, or task force, and thereafter withdraw from its meeting and not vote, nor be counted in the quorum in respect of such a matter. 10, you must ensure that confidential matters coming to your attention as a member of council are not disclosed by you except as required for the performance of your duties or as may be directed by the council, and preserve the secrecy with respect to all matters that come within your knowledge in the course of your duties. And that is something that's also set out in the Architects Act. 11, you must devote whatever time is reasonably necessary to properly perform your duties as a member of council. And finally, 12, you must perform such other duties as time to time may be agreed on between you and the council. And finally, it is also a requirement that a member of council whose conduct is a subject of a proceeding before the discipline committee is disqualified from sitting on the council pending the decision or order of that committee. So at this point, I will turn it over to Christy, who will be talking a little bit more about the time commitment involved.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. And welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be part of this inaugural meeting tonight. I had a quick look in the participant list, and I'm happy to see some new faces, but of course also some familiar faces. So as Claire has spoken in detail about the role of the OAA, also of council as a whole and individual council members, I think we need to acknowledge that this information and knowledge is critical, but what is also of great importance is understanding how this translates into practice, and in particular, your time. And so it's really, this is where the rubber hits the road. So as Claire noted in the previous slides, it should come as no surprise that the time commitment that comes with being a member of council is not to be understated. One of the key reasons that we're hosting this session is to ensure that there is a clear understanding of not only the role of council members, but also a better understanding with respect to the commitment that you're making, including the time necessary to fulfill your duties as a member of council. This information will hopefully serve you better and help you prepare if you are elected, and help manage your expectations about what is involved. Myself, having witnessed almost 10 full election cycles, so that's 10 times 3 with the OAA, I want to just take a minute to mention my admiration for the profession and individual members and their willingness to volunteer. It is a huge commitment, but I have heard and I understand it's rewarding. And some of you who know me may have heard me say this before, but usually at the end of the first year of a new councillor's time on council, they will suggest to me something along the lines, they'll say, I had no idea the breadth of the work that is undertaken by the OAA and the scope of activities, programs, and services that are going on. And so I tell you this not to scare you into the time commitment or the amount of work that's involved, but just to add that the comment that usually comes with that is also in the context of what they've learned as an individual, as a member of the profession, and or as a practitioner. So I think there's a lot of depth there. And again, just want to make the point that I think you'll get a lot out of it as well as the profession does as a self-regulating profession. So with those remarks and with that in mind, I want to share some information with everyone tonight in terms of what their time commitment might look like if you are elected, and of course for those that are already acclaimed. So as a member of council, you can expect to spend one full day attending council meetings approximately every 6 to 8 weeks or so. They're usually from 9:30 in the morning to 4 in the evening. And meetings are usually suspended, however, during the summer months. So that's usually July and August. The time to prepare for each council meeting, i.e. reviewing the agenda materials, the packages, perhaps reviewing or becoming familiar with some sections of the Act, regulations, or bylaws that pertain to that material, could take up to about half a day and perhaps a little more so at the beginning of your term. And depending on the actual content of the council meeting, it is possible to have a council package that's up to 250 pages or more. And again, I don't say this because I want to scare anybody in terms of volume of material, but I just want to make that clear in terms of what we're dealing with in breadth of activities and scope, but also to make the point that it really is critical that you come prepared to a meeting. So it's incumbent upon individual members of council to make sure that they've reviewed that material. And that speaks directly to one of the sections that Claire just spoke about in terms of the duties that are set out in legislation in terms of the roles and responsibilities of council members. And one other point that I just wanted to make, Claire spoke about responsibilities of council members who are sitting on committees to prepare reports and report to council. I did want to just mention that for the most part, that those reports are prepared by staff, and they're done so in a standard format with clear objectives and motions and background for consideration. So if you are in the situation where you're required to prepare a report for council, just want to point out that that's usually a staff, it's something that's done in tandem with staff. So in addition to council meetings, you will be expected to sit on at least one committee and may be involved in a task force or working group throughout your term. When we assign council to committees, note that we do take into consideration the workload of the various committees. Some meet monthly, some meet only a few times a year. So our goal is to make sure that we're not overloading council members with any one council member with too many heavily functioning committees. So we try to spread the work out, but again, you will be assigned to at least one, probably two committees on top of your council duties. In general, I think it's safe to say that you would need to set aside at least 2 to 3 days a month, with the expectation of course, there's no meetings in July and August for council, but about 2 or 3 days of the month to meet your responsibilities as an OAA council member. All council members are also expected to attend the annual general meeting of members that usually occurs in May, and also attend the OAA annual conference, which is generally held in tandem. And notwithstanding what's occurred over the last 18 months as we've dealt with the pandemic, so some of those that timing has changed slightly. OAA conference is generally held in person, and it includes a 3 to 4 day commitment as well. You will also have the opportunity as a member of council to consider running for election as an officer, which is essentially a vice president, senior vice president, or president position. These positions collectively comprise the executive committee of council. If you are elected to one of these positions, you should expect to spend some additional time fulfilling those responsibilities. And if you are successful and elected to council for next year, additional information will be forthcoming about the election of officers in the executive committee. And finally, as a member of council, you may be asked to serve as a councillor liaison to one of the 14 local societies that we have. And this may include participating in local society meetings, and hopefully you're doing that anyways. Last point that I'll make is some of the information and things that we're covering tonight. Once elections are completed and we have our new councillors in place, there will be a full orientation session that will be held for the benefit of council members. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Claire.
Thank you, Christy. Now I'm going to be getting a little bit more into the statutory framework of the Act and the mandate of the OAA. So I previously talked about how the Architects Act is the source of all of council's authority. And that concept is really important because it helps us understand what our jurisdiction is, where you might hear the expression, we need to stay in our lane. And that's because we are a creature of statute, meaning all of our authority comes from the Architects Act. So to that end, I would like to highlight a few key sections that will help orient you and ground you in what can sometimes feel like a very labyrinthine series of rules and regulations. So I first like to think about what the core purpose of the OAA is. And that's what we call the principal object. That's what it's called in our Act. And that will be the guiding principle, or ought to be the guiding principle, that will form the basis of all of council's decision. And namely, that is to regulate the practice of architecture so that the public interest is served and protected. You're going to hear that over and over and over again, but it's so integral whenever any important decision is being discussed, that is front and center. So I am actually going to be talking a little bit later on about how this privilege of self-regulation, and it is very much a privilege, it is not a right, can be taken away when a profession is seen to be regulating more in self-interest as opposed to public interest. So in addition to that primary principal object, the public interest, there are secondary objects that are really important to note as well, because that will help us focus the decision-making of council. And those secondary objects are first to maintain and develop and establish standards of knowledge and skill among its members. Secondly, qualifications and standards of practice for the practice of architecture. And third, standards of professional ethics among its members. Fourth, it's to establish and maintain or to assist in the establishment and maintenance of classes, schools, exhibitions, or lectures in the promotion of the public appreciation of architecture and the allied arts and sciences, sorry. And I should note that that's a very interesting section. Not a lot of professions, in fact, I'm not aware of any profession in Ontario that has a similar provision in its act. So that really speaks to the creative and artistic elements of architecture as a profession. So I feel as though that's something really to be proud of, one of the unique aspects of your profession. And finally, it's to perform any such duties and exercise such powers as are imposed or conferred on the association by the act. So that's kind of a catch-all section. So those are the secondary objects. And I want to point out that they must always exist in service to the primary, which is the public interest and protection object. It's safe to say that if an activity cannot be slotted into any of these noted objects, the OAA would be offside or outside its lane and would not have the authority to take action on those matters. So that's just something to keep in mind. And again, I really cannot emphasize enough the importance of understanding your role. And that's something that Christy spoke to at the beginning, the need to understand your role and grounding that particular understanding in these sections of the Act. So another important section of the Act to consider is Section 7, which sets out 34 separate activities, which I will not list this evening, but they're there if you want to ever take a look, where council is permitted to make regulations. While the list is long, it is exhaustive, meaning that if the activity is not listed, it will be outside of the OAA's jurisdiction. So again, that's another way to really narrow the focus of council's activities. Finally, the Act sets out criteria for a number of OAA activities, including, but not limited to, licensing of members, requirements for certificates of practice, process for seeking exemptions, the process for filing complaints, investigating members, prosecuting discipline, Act enforcements for illegal practice and holding out, election procedures, continuing education, and professional liability insurance. So if you are involved in matters that relate to any of the above, or a matter that I haven't mentioned, chances are the Act, regulations, and bylaws will touch on it. There's a good chance that there could be a practice tip, a regulatory notice, or council policy that also speaks to the issue on a more granular level. So it's important to, when discussing any of those particular issues, that you've done some homework before, diving in and taking a very firm position. It's always better to take your time and understand what's already been done, so you're not, reinventing the wheel. The best policy direction is set when there is a clear understanding of the framework in place. So the next slide and the next topic that I will be discussing is the concept of governance in the public interest, and specifically duties, fiduciary duties of care and confidentiality. So I already mentioned a few of the obligations that are set out in Section 7 of the bylaw, and they actually create law to enshrine things that already exist in what we know as the common law. But essentially, a fiduciary duty, I'm going to describe it a little bit more to hopefully broaden that bylaw, what it's already saying, so that you have a little bit of context. So backing up, a fiduciary duty exists in law when a person or entity places trust, confidence, and reliance on another to exercise discretion or expertise in acting on behalf of a client. So put another way, a fiduciary duty is the legal responsibility to act solely in the best interest of another party. As members of council, you would all assume the fiduciary duty of carrying out the responsibilities that I previously noted towards fellow members of the profession and to, of course, the public at large. And I also just wanted to point out that if elected, you are not representing a constituency of membership. For example, if you were a member in the Eastern region, you're elected, again, to serve and protect the public, not in service of the membership. And now I'm just going to get into specific, break down a few specific types of fiduciary duties. And again, you're going to see some themes here with the obligation that I mentioned previously in the bylaws. The first and most kind of wide reaching is the duty of care. And the duty of care requires members to exhibit honesty, act in good faith, and exercise ordinary and reasonable care in the discharge of their duties. Councillors must attend, thoroughly prepare for, and actively engage in deliberations during the meetings, and when necessary, seek advice from third-party experts, such as lawyers or accountants. The second is the duty of confidentiality. Again, that was something that's set out in the bylaws. That requires councillors to maintain the confidentiality of council discussions and deliberations and provides the disclosure of any non-public information, prohibits the disclosure of any non-public information that a councillor may be privy to by virtue of their position. The association's best interest will be served when a healthy debate and candid conversations take place, which requires councillors to have confidence that their colleagues will also uphold the duty of confidentiality. The third is the duty of loyalty, and that requires an undivided allegiance and duty of faithfulness to the association. The best interests of the association must prevail over any individual interest, and the use of a councillor position or information gained through such a position for any personal benefit is prohibited. Councillors must avoid, disclose, and resolve any conflicts of interest. If a conflict of interest is not resolved, the duty of loyalty may require a councillor to abstain from voting, participate in discussions, and potentially from hearing a debate. Fourth is the duty of obedience, and that requires councillors to act in accordance with and in furtherance of the association's mission and governing documents. So that would be our act, the bylaws, the rules, the policies, in addition to any applicable laws or regulations. So the building code, anything like that. The duty of obedience requires councillors to support, help implement, and carry out the actions taken by the association's board of directors. Association leaders must avoid undermining a council decision or policy, even if the councillor disagrees with the action taken on a particular issue. And finally, it's the duty of accounting, which requires councillors to safeguard, protect, and preserve association assets by adopting and following proper accounting procedures and control. Association leaders should ensure association funds are used for lawful purposes. So the next slide that I will be talking about is something that you may or may not have heard about, but it has kind of bubbled up in Canada, is the principle of right touch regulation. It's actually something that came to us from the UK. But currently the OAA is really looking to enhance and improve its activities and to that end, to become more aligned with what is known as right touch regulation. And really, right touch isn't a law or a policy or anything like that. It's really what it is a conceptual framework that helps us think about what is good regulation. So we don't just want to be competent, we want to be really good at what we do. And those 6 principles can be summarized, and I'll do so. The first one being that it is proportionate. So that means that a regulator should only intervene when necessary. Even though we may have the regulatory might, we don't necessarily have to use that full force in every instance. Remedies should be appropriate to the risk posed and the costs identified and minimized. The second principle is that regulation should be consistent. So rules and standards should be joined up, aligned, and implemented fairly. Third, that it is targeted. Again, regulation should be focused on a problem, and any side effects of that regulation should be minimized. Fourth, the regulation should be transparent. Regulators need to be open and keep those regulations simple and user-friendly. Fifth, regulators should be accountable and must be able to justify their decisions, not just to the members, but also to public scrutiny as well. And finally, the final principle is that of agility. Regulation should look forward and be able to anticipate and adapt to change. And we all know that we're living in a world full of change. So in practice, this framework can help us identify the regulatory force we need to achieve a desired effect. Our analogy is finding a right balance on a set of scales. So when weighing something on balancing scales, nothing happens until you reach the desired weight, at which point the scales tip over. Once they've tipped any further, once they tip any further weight can be added to the other side, which is ineffectual. So the right amount of regulation is exactly what is needed for the desired effect. Too little is ineffective, too much is a waste of effort. Right touch neatly describes the role that regulation should play. It builds on accurate and informed assessment and analysis of the sector and the risks in it. It is common sense in that it describes the role that regulation should play, building on its strength, staying true to its objectives, and working with the tools it has at its disposal. It recognizes that there's no such thing as zero risk, and that all decisions about what and how to regulate will involve trade-offs between risks and competing benefits. Right touch regulation recognizes that there is usually more than one way to do something. So as I noted, it is not an additional rule or requirement. It is rather a way of thinking about our role as regulators. And it is a very helpful framework where we can come together to make meaningful and impactful choices. So I'm now going to hand it back to Christy, who's going to be talking a little bit more about Council strategic goals and objectives.
Thanks again, Claire. Before I start, I just want to mention that this particular section in our program for tonight, Agatha Mancini, who is our Senior Vice President and Treasurer, had wanted to be here to speak to this because it's really about Council's strategic goals and objectives. And also there's a few thoughts that she had wanted to share in terms of just how your role as a council member functions practically, in a few thoughts. But unfortunately, Agatha, last minute, she just couldn't make it tonight. So I'm going to cover this piece in the program, and I'm going to read the remarks and make the remarks that she had wanted to make. So again, apologies and regrets from Agatha. I'll just jump right in, and really what we wanted to cover here is, in addition to understanding your role, the role of the OAA, and in particular, the mandate of the OAA in the public interest, I wanted to point out that Council meets annually to review and confirm its strategic goals and objectives. Most recently, the OAA has undergone an operational review. And through that review, we have identified the need to engage in a longer term 5-year strategic planning exercise. And so this process, as you can appreciate, requires patience, it requires foresight, and also commitment to building lasting change. So next year in January, February, and actually it's going to start very shortly, we are going to be embarking on a longer term strategic plan exercise. Notwithstanding that, I just want to share with you that Council has established, and I'm hoping that you might be aware of this through information that comes out from the OAA, that OAA has established and the OAA Council has established a number of key overarching goals and objectives that I'll say could essentially be considered lenses through which the OAA and Council's work is undertaken. These lenses include equity, diversity, and inclusion, climate stability, or perhaps the better term is climate crisis, and then education. And this includes the members, the public, clients, owners, and government. And in addition to that, just outlining those goals and objectives, I'm just going to again read for you something that Agata had prepared and her thoughts on from the perspective of a council member. And so I'll just read this. It's important to remember that the mandate of the OAA is established through the Architects Act. As council members, our priority is to govern in order that our primary mandate is fulfilled now and into the future. If you are elected to council, you may be asked by members about specific activities, about initiatives that might be considered in sole support of the membership, or that would reflect lobbying efforts on behalf of the profession. And while the OAA, which Claire has mentioned earlier, is one of only a few regulators that have an element of advocacy within its legislated mandate, it is again important to note that this applies not to promoting the profession or the public interest, the profession's interest solely. It refers to promoting the public appreciation of architecture, the allied arts and sciences. And where the profession's interests align with the public interest, that's where the council can act within its secondary mandate. So again, the council and the OAA can never act in a way that undermines or fails to serve the public interest. It is within these parameters that council makes its decisions, develops its policies and programming, and regulates the practice of architecture. And I'm going to hand it back over to Claire now.
Thanks, Christy. And we're at the home stretch now. So although I can't see your faces, I do appreciate everybody staying with us, and particularly through some of those sections of the Act and regulations. I appreciate that not everybody here, no one here but me and our lawyers. So that's sometimes a bit of a grind. But we're now really at the point where I wanted to talk about some of the developments in governance and some of the trends that we're seeing. What we're hearing, and interestingly, a lot of these changes are kind of coming out west and they seem to be moving towards Ontario, but we're hearing this term tectonic shifts in the world of professional regulation. And a lot of that is being triggered by regulatory failures, of course, greater scrutiny in the media, and governments that are paying closer attention to professional regulators. What we're also seeing is shifting public expectations, where they demand greater transparency, timeliness, accessibility. There's also a greater awareness of the impacts of systemic racism, the Me Too movement, and of course, there's a greater demand for mobility. And all of these factors, all of these seismic or tectonic shifts are really demanding a modern response from regulators. And practically speaking, what we're seeing is a number of governance reviews that are coming across Canada and abroad. And this slide just shows you a bit of a visual of some of the governance reviews that have happened across Canada and also internationally, I believe, as well. And really what they're doing is they're sort of calling into question this older, more closed door way of doing things, and really trying to bring up regulation to standards of, really core principles of the legal system, of procedural fairness, some of the concepts that I mentioned in right touch, proportionality, transparency, agility, all of those factors. And really what those reports are looking at are concerns about professional interests, so self-interests taking priority over public protection. They're also looking at the fact that governance structures can be confusing and create confusion for the public. Board members, committee members, registrants, and the public are confused about what the role of the regulator is. Like, what is it we do? Advocacy, regulation, how does that all work? There's also, some criticism or some analysis of the fact that a lot of those in professional regulation believe that self-regulation is an absolute right versus a privilege. And that's something we talked about, or I mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar. They're looking at the lack of focus on public safety and public protection. A very common theme is this promotion of turf protection versus having just interprofessional collaboration. So that we see amongst very kind of similarly situated professions where there might be sort of competing scopes or similar types of work. Divisions between associations or groups, advocacy groups and regulators are not clearly defined. And also, because of maybe a large number of regulators and very small professions, that creates inefficiencies, siloed thinking, inconsistencies. So all of this to say, we don't need to solve any of this tonight, but the OAA is certainly keeping a very close eye on those changes in the regulatory landscape. And we will all continue to take proactive measures to modernize our regulatory framework. It's really, I believe, very important to look at these other examples of where regulators went wrong, so to speak, and to really learn from these cautionary tales so that the OAA can maintain its autonomy and its agency and to continue to do the great work that it does. In particular, the OAA is actively looking at ways to ensure that the profession is more equitable and diverse and inclusive. And so we have begun collecting demographic data so that we can measure progress in that regard. Of course, sustainability and the climate emergency, as mentioned earlier, is another core priority that does inform the strategic direction of the OAA. So on that, I will now turn it over to the question and answer period of the night. And I think so far I see that there's one question and it sounds like something that I think Christy Doyle, you could answer.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Claire. And I just want to mention too to anybody, if you want to ask a question, you want to chat orally, we can turn your mics on. I know this format that we're using right now is the webinar format. We did it purposely so that we can record it in a way that can be preserved and placed up for future reference, or for those that couldn't attend, they can watch it. The other issue was we weren't sure whether we were going to have 50 people or 10 people. So again, hence the format that we used in terms of the webinar format. So I'm going to actually go to the question and answer box and look at what's there. But again, if anybody wants to just ask a question orally, if you raise your hand, use the raise a hand function, the technician will turn your microphone on and you can ask away. So I see in the chat, James asked a question. Has it been determined if meetings, planning sessions, and conference attendance will be in person? So I'm happy to speak to that. There's a couple of different questions I think in there. I'll actually work backwards because conference this year is being planned in May in Toronto. We are planning to be in person. Having said that, we are adhering to restrictions that are currently in place with the venue that we're going to be at. And there'll also be some virtual components. So that's the conference offsite event. In terms of the OAA, and I know this is something perhaps council, those that are running for council in general are wondering about. So right now, as everybody is probably aware, the OAA is closed for operations in general. We have been for about 18 months. The plan right now, and I'm actually working on a plan with our manager of HR, but also in concert with governance to look at likely reopening the office in January. And that's dependent on the numbers that we're seeing in terms of COVID cases. It's dependent on us watching what government directives come down, what health officials are saying about any COVID restrictions. So barring anything drastically changing, that's the plan. What that will mean, though, is that staff will start to begin to transition back. There may be hybrid working options there, but for the purposes of meetings and also council meetings, I think my feeling, and this is something that's going to go to council in terms of just making sure that we're all on the same page of how we're going to operate into the new year. But you know, we've been using Zoom a lot. I think for the most part, I would suggest that meetings that are shorter are going to continue to be held by Zoom, even if we're reopened and back at the office. So that's certainly one way that we've supported in the past too, in terms of having that option of remote access, because it also opens up accessibility for members to be on committees. It cuts down on travel, on time. So that's probably where we're going to be, whether it's shorter meetings. Council in particular, somebody else asked me this question today. I'm not sure I have the answer 100% for this, because I know that we do have capabilities to be remote. It will be a discussion that council itself will need to have about how they want to hold their meetings. We have been holding them virtually. I will say that as a full day meeting, it is likely going to be a little bit difficult to have some people remote and some people in person. But again, no final decisions on that. I think it's something that council itself will need to talk about and determine how they want to function going forward into the near future and beyond. So hopefully, James, that answered your question. The planning session right now that usually happens in early February. And as I mentioned before, that is going to be a very specific facilitated strategic planning session. We're hiring a consultant. Right now, the plan is to have that session in person at the OAA. And when I say that too, I want to be clear with everybody that we will have the necessary safety measures in place in terms of distancing, masking, cleaning. So that is when we do go back to the building, all of that will be in place as well. We will have everybody adhering to that. And I guess I'll mention it because it is in the council package. There is a policy going forward regarding mandatory vaccination. It is going forward to council on Thursday for consideration. So that might be another question that people, members, potential members, and members at large will be asking as to what position the OAA will take on that. Does anybody else? I only see that question. Hopefully, James, that helped. Anything else? Just a couple of notes. If you have Christy's, are you holding your hand up, Christy?
Oh, I think Susan's raised her hand, Christy.
I don't see it. Okay, Susan, there's we can see you.
Hello.
Excellent. Go ahead. Yes, Susan.
I've been listening very, very patiently, and that
I'm
was
sorry.
a great presentation. Thank you, everybody. It was really informative. I just wanted, I don't know how many people are on the call because I can't see any of that information, but these are the rules, but it's also a lot of fun. I just wanted to say that it's really important to understand, like, as I don't know who said, stay in your lane. It's a really important concept to stay in your lane. But when you're in your lane, you're always around a table with lots of very interesting, smart people doing the kind of work that is only going to make the profession in the world better. So just to kind of have a little counterpoint to all the rules help you do the correct work, but the work is fun actually. And the people you work with are really interesting, both staff and architects as members. So just wanted to throw that little piece in there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Susan. I think that's really an important part. And I was trying to reiterate that when I think, for the most part, feedback that I hear from council is that they find it a terrific learning experience as well.
Yeah.
So hopefully that rings true. I'm going to actually, Sherry, I'm not sure I can see people raising their hands. So is there anybody else that's raising their hand? Okay.
No, there isn't anybody raising their hand yet, but maybe we can give it a few more minutes.
Okay. I will mention to everybody that if you are requiring continuing education points, we will add an hour to your transcript for your participation in this webinar.
There is one more question that I can address. Can you hear me,
Yeah.
Christy?
Yeah.
It looks like they're asking about the Ask the Candidate questions during the election. If we receive any questions via Ask the Candidate, and I hope I've got the question right, we will be sending them directly to you so that you have the opportunity to respond, and then the OAA Communications Department will have them put up on the website under your specific web area. I think that answers it.
Great. Thanks, Christy. Give it one more minute. I would ask too, if anybody has any feedback for us on the session. This is our inaugural session. Hoping the information has been useful. As I said earlier, there will be another full orientation session that will be set up for new councillors, and that will happen just before the December council meeting. Again, I'm not sure if anybody's aware of this, and it may or may not, Tina may or may not have, she probably won't have done this, but Tina Carfa, who works a lot with council, directly with council and staff, she will let those that are elected know about the December council meeting, because we always invite the newly elected council members to the December council meeting just as observers, so that they can see it, they can understand sort of how the flow of the meeting works and be ready to jump in January. So that's something else that you should be prepared, that if you are elected to council, you'll get invited to that December council meeting. I believe it's December 10th, but more information will come on that front. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I don't see any more hands. So Christy, do you want to close it off, or?
Yeah, no, I want to reiterate, Claire, yourself, Christy, and Susan as well. Thank you for those comments. That I want to thank everybody for attending and listening to us and participating in this inaugural event. I'm really happy that we could bring this sort of high level information to you about what it means to be a counselor on the OAA Council. And if there are any follow-up questions or anything you can think of, Claire, Christy, or myself, we're always available. Just reach out to us and we're happy to assist and help with anything that you might think of. And that's my final comments. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.